So a big win for President Trump and his National Guard troops. Today, a federal appeals court ruled that he can keep control of the National Guard in Los Angeles because
it started with a protest, but now a courtroom decision has shaken the foundation of American democracy. In a stunning and controversial move, a federal appeals court has just ruled that Donald Trump will retain control over the California National Guard, even as tensions in Los Angeles continue to rise and armored vehicles remain on American streets. For the first time in decades, a sitting president has overridden state authority to keep command of a military force not abroad, but here on US soil. And the question echoing across the country is chilling. Can a president now use the military to police Americans without state consent? This isn't a movie. This isn't fiction. This is happening now. Legal experts are calling it a direct threat to the Constitution. Civil rights groups say it's the most dangerous expansion of federal power in modern US history. And millions of Americans are asking themselves, if the military answers only to Washington, who protects the people? In today's video, we dive into the ruling, the dangerous precedent it could set for the future of American freedom. Buckle up, because what just happened may change how power is used in this country forever. It didn't begin with tanks or helicopters. It started quietly, behind closed doors. Federal immigration agents conducted an early morning series of raids across Los Angeles, targeting suspected undocumented individuals. But what was meant to be a controlled enforcement action quickly ignited public outrage when footage surfaced showing legal residents and even US citizens being detained. The images were raw: children crying, workers handcuffed in front of colleagues, families broken apart in real time. Within hours, spontaneous protests erupted, first in immigrant neighborhoods, then across the city. What had started as outrage over immigration enforcement evolved into a full-blown movement, demanding accountability, transparency, and justice. Local police struggled to contain the scale of demonstration. Clashes intensified. Community leaders called for de-escalation, but tensions kept rising. Behind the scenes, state officials began pushing back against what they called federal overreach. But the federal government had already decided. This wasn't just civil unrest, it was a matter of national control. And that's when the deployment order was signed not by California, but by the White House. This wasn't just about restoring calm, it was about power. Who holds it, who's allowed to use it, and what happens when it's used without consent. What began on the streets of Los Angeles quickly moved into the courtroom, raising urgent questions about constitutional boundaries and executive power. California's state government filed an emergency lawsuit demanding the immediate return of authority over its National Guard. Their argument was simple. Under the Constitution, each state retains control over its own military forces unless formally federalized for war or a national emergency. In their view, the situation in Los Angeles didn't meet that threshold. But the federal government pushed back hard. Trump's legal team argued that the unrest posed a threat not just to local order, but to national security and border integrity. They cited the Insurrection Act, a centuries-old law allowing the president to deploy federal troops when rebellion or lawlessness overwhelmed state authority. The court was caught between two conflicting interpretations: state sovereignty versus national supremacy, local crisis versus federal emergency. In a narrow but high-stakes decision, the Federal Appeals Court ruled in Trump's favor, stating that due to the scale of unrest and the president's claim of a clear and present danger, he could temporarily retain command of California's National Guard. But this ruling didn't settle the issue, it lit a constitutional fuse. Legal scholars immediately raised alarms, warning that the decision dismantled long-standing checks and balances. By allowing a sitting president to override a governor's authority without congressional approval. The court had essentially opened the door to federal military control during civilian unrest, anywhere, anytime. Now, with the Supreme Court likely to hear the case next, the nation faces a defining legal moment. Can the federal government unilaterally use state military forces against the will of the states themselves? And more importantly, if this precedent stands, What's to stop future leaders from using it to suppress protests, silence critics, or tip the balance in an election? The court's decision to let President Trump retain control of the California National Guard might appear, at first glance, as a legal technicality, a temporary measure in response to civil unrest. But beneath the surface, it represents a moment of extraordinary and unsettling change, one that strikes at the very core of how power is divided in the United States. Historically, each U.S. state has held command over its National Guard forces. These units exist primarily to serve their state's interests, responding to natural disasters, maintaining order during local emergencies, and if necessary, supplementing federal forces in times of war. But what makes the Guard unique is that it is meant to be dual-purpose yet state-led unless clearly federalized through established legal channels. In this case, that process was bypassed, or at least stretched to a dangerous degree. Despite the fact that the governor of California requested the return of control, citing an easing of tensions and a desire to handle the crisis locally, the federal government refused. Instead, it asserted that national interests took precedence, citing security concerns and invoking the authority of the presidency under emergency statutes. What makes this ruling so alarming is not just the specific outcome, it's the precedent it establishes. By siding with the federal government, the court effectively ruled that a sitting president can override a state's authority and command military forces within its borders without the governor's consent. This decision sends a powerful and potentially perilous message that in times of perceived unrest, the federal government may sideline state leadership and place boots on the ground without clear constitutional safeguards. And here lies the real danger. If one president can do it, so can the next. Imagine a future administration facing large-scale protests, perhaps driven by opposition to policy or a contested election result. With this precedent in place, that administration could cite the very same reasoning: public unrest, threats to order, and move to deploy federalized Guard troops without consulting state leadership. The guardrails that once protected state sovereignty and civil liberties could be eroded, all under the pretext of maintaining peace. For many Americans, particularly those in communities that have long faced over-policing or racial profiling, this ruling doesn't feel like protection. It feels like a warning that their streets can be militarized at any moment and that the decision may no longer lie with their local representatives but with distant federal powers. In the end, this ruling does more than resolve a legal question. It opens a door that many believed and hoped would remain firmly closed. And once opened, it's not just hard to shut again, it's hard to forget. This isn't just about California, it's about the future of power in America. If the line between democracy and control is blurring, who will draw it again? Let us know in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe for more eye-opening stories. Thanks for watching.